We thank you for the life and the legacy of Sister Naya.
Yes, Lord.
Even when you place it
Yes, Lord.
in the hands of God.
God, we ask you that you will meet all of us, bless all of us,
Please,
look
Jesus.
over all of us,
Please, Jesus.
save us,
Please, Jesus.
deliver us.
Please, Jesus.
There is still so much pain.
You shouldn't have to bury your child.
The wounds are deep,
You made me whole. You gave me purpose.
and they may never heal.
I want my son back. I want to hold my son. I want to be able to tell him I love him. And I know I can't have that ever.
The violent crime destroying lives in our community has repeatedly put St. Louis on the list of the most dangerous cities in America.
They killing each other out here for nothing. They act like it's a sport.
Just days before leaving for college on a full scholarship last summer, 18-year-old honor student Anaya Cook was shot in the face.
For someone to take her life, to shoot her in her face, beautiful young lady, to shoot her in her face, that is the ultimate.
Anaya was sitting with her boyfriend in his car in the Kingsway West neighborhood on the city's north side when gunmen opened fire on the vehicle. Prosecutors say her uninjured boyfriend was the intended target.
It plays in my mind like, what happened that night? Like, did my baby call out for us? Every picture, she's smiling.
Anaya was the only child of Orlando and Rochelle Cook, who spent 3 agonizing days and nights at Barnes Jewish Hospital as Anaya fought for her life.
We had been so beat up and kicked around and pushed around to where when they told us that she had finally passed, it was almost a relief.
It was a relief.
We had been beat so bad.
5 months after Anaya's murder, 36-year-old Brian Seiler was walking his dog on the city's south side in the Dutchtown neighborhood when he was shot in the back of the head.
I just lost it. I just crumbled down to the table and sobbed.
Mary Seiler is Brian's mother. Brian was her only child.
Nobody should have to feel what I'm feeling. Nobody.
Police found Brian's wallet in his pocket. His dog was still attached to the leash on his lifeless arm. That night, just 2 days before Christmas, she was the person who identified her dead son's body.
They pulled the curtain back and you see their body there. You can't touch them. You can't hug them. You can't do anything but look.
Sometimes the shootings happen in broad daylight, in a bold, violent barrage that few of us can imagine.
Please, Lord. Please, Lord Jesus.
7 months ago, in the Penrose neighborhood on the city's north side, gunfire erupted outside the home of Terry Burgess.
I heard it. It was so close.
The bullets missed her 4-year-old grandson, who raced to the front door and grabbed hold of her.
He was terrified. He had a look on his face like he was running for his life. He's 4.
Still outside, Terry's daughter Carolyn and Carolyn's 16-year-old son Pierre.
He just was running straight, and as soon as I got up to him, he fell.
Pierre had been shot in the back. The junior ROTC cadet and athlete who dreamed of being a lawyer died there, surrounded by more than 20 shell casings. He had taken 2 younger cousins to the store for candy bars.
I just wish I wouldn't have never called him to go down the street to the store, because he would never been down there. It's sad that nobody's surprised when a 16-year-old is gunned down.
I need everybody behind this tape.
Researchers have repeatedly documented that violent crime, especially murder, is far more likely to happen in urban neighborhoods with extreme poverty, low levels of education, high unemployment, low percentages of home ownership, bad schools or closed schools that can add to a feeling of unrest, abandonment, and a lack of accomplishment, and families headed by single parents who move frequently, which creates even more instability. Racial segregation and the feeling by a race of people that they are isolated also plays a role. Nearly all of these neighborhoods in our region are more than 90% African American. The problems get worse when children from violent neighborhoods are vulnerable to attack inside their own schools, places where they should finally feel safe.
You add all that together, and that's the recipe for violent crime in a neighborhood.
Rick Rosenfeld is a criminology professor at the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Any single factor alone is not the problem. The problem is the degree to which these factors interact. In other words, you find all of them feeding off one another and in the same places.
In our region, we see extraordinary rates of violent crime. East St. Louis and Washington Park have the highest murder rates in the country, more than 20 times the national average. Much of North St. Louis City is also far above the national average. Smaller pockets in South St. Louis and the Jennings area in North St. Louis County also have extremely high rates of homicide. Terrell Golson is also an expert in the study of criminal behavior.
Born and raised in this hood.
He got his education on the streets of one of St. Louis's most violent neighborhoods.
I should have been dead a long time ago.
Terrell is a former member of a North St. Louis gang called the Grape Street Crips.
I wanted to be Billy Badass in my neighborhood.
As a young child living in poverty and surrounded by drugs, Terrell says that when he was 8, he was beaten so badly for so long that St. Louis police kicked down the door of his bedroom and removed him from his home.
My mama despised me. I got to the age where, like 10, I wanted to kill my mother. I literally found a 22 through one of the dope fiends in the neighborhood, wanted to get 2 stones for a 22.
He says a friend stopped him from using that 22 to shoot his mother, but Terrell's anger didn't go away.
This was all I knew.
Despite being removed from the neighborhood and given another chance, he still came back and joined the gang, believing it was his only family.
Well, my mama gave up on me. Why would anybody else want me? And I came from my mom.
During his years as a Crip, his rap sheet grew to include more than 40 arrests, including ones for shootings, assaults, armed criminal actions, and even 2 murders. He was eventually convicted of drug-related crimes and sent to prison twice. How easy is it to get a semi-automatic gun?
Easy. Just like it is when you go cash your paycheck.
Just before the boldest shootings in broad daylight, Terrell says some gang members arrive in a convoy of rental cars with tinted windows.
They gonna come, they coming hard. 4, 5 cars tinted up, dress riding like me and you.
Their targets are usually rival gang members or individuals suspected of being involved in a previous shooting that targeted them. Among gangs, the revenge shootings are perceived as street justice.
But it's still wrong.
Wrong is wrong, but you never know what that guy did. Karma is karma, you know what I'm saying? So what you do to somebody don't mean that somebody gonna look the other way, you hear me?
Years ago, he was shot in the back, leaving him with a gruesome injury. The blast ripped through his lower torso, leaving his insides barely contained by a thin wall of flesh.
What are we looking at right here?
They see the chest bone they brought down. This all my testing right here.
After he was shot, he says the gang members he almost died for weren't there for him, not at the hospital or during his years behind bars.
That ain't got me nowhere, man. My block, Grape Street, ain't did nothing for me, man.
Now he wears any color he wants, even red, the color of his former enemies, the Bloods.
I once was one of y'all, you know what I'm saying? So everybody have a story to tell, and I got a story.
Now Terrell Golson is visiting classrooms with other former gang members as part of a program sponsored by the group Better Family Life. And he has a warning about the risks of being caught in this cycle of violence.
The fast money ain't the way to go, I'm telling y'all, it ain't.
It's one way Terrell is trying to break out of this cycle and make his family proud.
I try to make away from my 4-year-old so he'd never have to see half the his daddy had to go through.
I miss him so much.
Tears are the ties that bind families devastated by violence.
I love you, bro.
In the graveyards,
I just kept screaming, God, no, God, no, God, no, God, no.
family rooms, and on the streets.
Stop the violence, Lord Jesus,
Yes,
and replace it with love.
Grieving families are praying
And we ask and pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
for a safer St. Louis.
She has touched so many people's lives when she was here and not here that her death won't be in vain. I know it won't.
He was wide-eyed and innocent.
Nigel was always a good kid.
Nigel Generally, the youngest of 3 boys born to a proud mother.
Nigel was never a problem child and never got into trouble. I never had any issues with him.
Nigel?
How you doing?
But Nigel had serious problems, and we're all paying the price.
I won't never see him out here anymore. I won't live unless I live to be 8 years old. I'll never see my son.
It's not the first time the family has run on prison time. Nigel's father is 20 years into a 75-year sentence for armed robbery.
My son was a baby when I got locked up.
Nigel's older brother John, who's mentally ill, is in jail facing robbery charges.
I need real help.
This is the story about the breakdown of one St. Louis family, how it happened, and how much it's costing us as a society. Our story begins in Alton, Illinois. Nigel's mom, Nicole, born in 1969, was a little girl known for her big and bright smile. But behind that smile, she was hiding a secret that was tearing her apart.
I was abused, sexually abused by family members.
She got depressed, had low self-esteem, and felt alone. Nicole says her parents separated and that she rarely saw her father, even though he lived in the same town.
He wasn't there, and that hurt a lot.
In December 1987, just 2 weeks before Christmas of her senior year in high school, Nicole gave birth to her first son, John. In 1989, her second son, Nicholas, was born. Court records show that Nicole repeatedly filed criminal charges against their father, accusing him of physically abusing her. In at least 3 cases, the charges were dropped because Nicole didn't show up for court. She kept going back to him, hoping and praying things would get better.
He told me if he couldn't be with me, he was not gonna, if I didn't want to be with him, he was not gonna be there for the kids. And he meant it.
About a year after Nick was born, Nicole packed up her belongings in the middle of the night, took her 2 sons, and left their father.
Yeah.
Not long after that, she met Keith Buckles, a man with a long history of car theft and forgery. They had a son, Nigel, born in 1992. 2 years later, Keith Buckles was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 75 years in prison for masterminding the operation.
She loves them boys more than anything.
He spoke to us at the Menard Medium Security Prison in Chester, Illinois.
Mr. Cheatham, as God is my witness, I had nothing to do with them doing these armed robberies.
2 of his own children by a different woman testified against him, even though court records show there was conflicting evidence about whether he was involved at all. Keith was convicted and received more time than many killers get for a cold-blooded murder. He also lost his appeal.
I see my babies falling off one at a time, and I can't do nothing about it.
In 1996, 2 years after Buckles was sentenced to prison, Nicole Generally was charged with cocaine possession. When she finished her probation in January 2000, she was 31 with 3 sons, ages 13, 11, and 8. She and the boys moved repeatedly, and Nicole continued drinking heavily. Her anxiety and depression made it harder to hold a job. The family fell deeper into poverty and despair.
A lot of things were ugly, and I know that probably had a big impact on their lives also. Seeing me drunk out of my mind, you know what I'm saying? Or having a different guy every 5-6 months, Probably because I drank. I wouldn't say because I drank. I didn't feel that I ran into the right guys, but I still don't think that was cool I think I should not have introduced them all to my kids so soon.
Well, what was the worst part of the way you grew up? What were the worst things about it?
Drinking.
Your mom's drinking.
Yeah.
We interviewed Nigel at the Menard Maximum Security Penitentiary in Chester, just a short drive from where his father is incarcerated.
What was so bad about that?
It affects you. It makes you feel like, man, I ain't got nobody. What can I do? You know what I'm saying? I just want to run away, just get away.
In an effort to escape the problems in their home, Nigel and his brothers joined a North St. Louis gang. John, who suffers from bipolar disorder, seemed to embrace gang violence the most.
I've been shot twice. It ain't cool, man. More than 15 of my homeboys get killed.
Diagnosed with mental illness as a teen, John became angrier, depressed, and suicidal.
I done tried to kill myself a lot of times.
Why?
Because I be getting tired of living. I be getting tired of going through this stuff.
John, who is 25,
Got my daughter right there.
says he has 7 children.
Got 2 sons right here.
Just before he got arrested for a crime he says he didn't commit, John believed that he had it all. Finally, he was able to get a monthly government check for his disability.
My girl.
And his girlfriend got a government housing subsidy. It was his version of the American dream.
I was getting everything that I possibly wanted when I was a kid for my kids. That's what I wanted to do. I want to grow up and be a family, have a family, a happy family, away from violence.
Both John and Nicholas were shot. Nicole still remembers running to Nick as he laid on his back, the teenage boy partially paralyzed by a bullet.
When I get down there and I see him laying there on the ground, on his back, and he couldn't move, and he looks up at me and he says, "It's your fault for moving us down here. It's your fault," you know, and I can never get that out of my head.
Nigel was never shot, but some of his best friends were killed. After one of those murders, he dropped out of school. It was 2008. He was 16. Then, 3 years later, as the 19-year-old father of a newborn son, Nigel claims he was forced to commit a robbery to pay off a debt to a drug dealer. Nigel says the dealer threatened to kill his family if he didn't do it.
What else was I supposed to do?
2 days later, Nigel attempted to rob 23-year-old Tyler Hoppy at gunpoint. Nigel claims the gun accidentally went off, but regardless of how it happened, Hoppy was still dead, killed by a gunshot to his head.
My finger slipped and pulled the trigger, but I didn't pull.
So did you shoot him or not?
Nah.
You didn't shoot him?
Nah.
It's like somebody literally ripped my heart out.
Rachel Rawlings was Tyler Hoppy's girlfriend. She was 2 months pregnant when Nigel killed him. A week later, she had a miscarriage. That was a year and a half ago.
My whole world is gone. Everything came to an immediate halt. They didn't just take his life, they took mine too.
Yeah, I did wrong. Saying I did it. But at the same time, I do not deserve to spend the rest of my life in a penitentiary.
Although Nigel didn't know it at the time of the murder, Tyler was his cousin.
I apologize that I put myself in a position to even harm him. But at the same time, that can't change nothing.
This is a tragedy, but it's a tragedy that occurs frequently.
James Clark.
What's up, brother? You all right?
Is the vice president of Better Family Life.
We will give you what you need.
A local nonprofit that has a long history of helping troubled teens and former convicts get jobs and become involved in the community in a more productive way.
We have allowed some of our neighborhoods to become incubators for this kind of family tradition that becomes a neighborhood condition, and now it's a cancer that is eating at the core of the foundation of St. Louis.
Like any untreated cancer, the one that has devoured the Generally family continues to grow.
I'm doing the same thing to my son that my old man did to me.
I've done the blame me thing for all of their years, and I'm trying to get past that because I do know, that I raised them well. I raised them as best as I was able. The past, we have to leave in the past and take each day now to try to make things better and make things right. We are all we have.
We're headed to the 4700 block of Caseyville that has been identified as a trouble spot.
We're heading to 4 block, a violent stretch of Caseyville Road in Washington Park.
To be able to be truly effective, I need additional manpower.
Our guide is Police Chief Aubrey Keller, a former deputy chief in East St. Louis who came out of retirement to help Washington Park.
They killed my baby boy.
When we get there, the chief is approached by a murder victim's mother. Her son was killed right here 2 years ago.
I cannot let go of this right here because I am broke. They have broke me.
In 2011 alone, there were 11 murders in this impoverished village of 4,100 people. That's 1 killing for every 370 residents, a murder rate that was 8 times higher than the city of St. Louis had that year.
Police won't do nothing. Come on now. But they say they still looking for them. You're not looking for them.
Tell him one time and don't tell him again.
The Washington Park Police Department is overwhelmed by the violence and severely underfunded to fight it.
Things are just out of control.
Right now, he ain't under arrest.
During a typical week, the village doesn't even have 2 cops on the streets for every shift. Several officers have been prosecuted for misconduct in recent years. Others avoided criminal charges, but are the frequent targets of complaints. The headquarters is in a rundown building that had rotting garbage piling up behind it during the heat of the summer. Officers are paid as little as $12 an hour to serve and protect in one of the most violent communities in America.
Are you confident in your police department, the officers who serve this community?
Well, I'm confident in the oath we take.
Now Chief Keller, on the job since May, says it's time for this broken community to admit that it can't protect itself.
I don't think it's feasible to continue as a police department providing patrol services that are inadequate to the community. And that calls for me to recommend the dissolution of the police department.
The problems facing Washington Park are shared by many other small, poor communities in the St. Louis area.
Prepare to copy 1028.
You gotta respect the man.
Contraband found in the vehicle.
Where cops are paid little to dodge bullets and save lives in what some prosecutors call war zones.
It's a 45 and it's in between your eyes.
Right next to Washington Park in the village of Brooklyn.
No guns or anything in here?
Cops are always looking for the gun.
All right.
Sir, I got a gun right here on my right.
I know you got a gun. Hey. Get on the ground.
Oh, man.
Hands to your side.
Time is 1 a.m.
In September, we followed Brooklyn police.
Every element possible is coming to Brooklyn.
On their most dangerous shift.
Make sure all the lights and sirens are together. All equipment is active. Everybody's cool. All right. Let's do it, man. Let's get out here.
Overnights on weekends, the clubs in the small village of less than 700 residents draw thousands of partiers from all over the metro area.
Don't make our job any harder. Just please sit in the vehicle and remain quiet. The violence is out here. You know, they'll come put a gun up to you and try to take your car and just take whatever you have.
Brooklyn Police Chief Tony Tomlinson says his officers take up to 15 guns a month off the streets.
Suspended.
Typically in traffic stops late at night near the clubs.
If someone was to fire one of these weapons with all the people that are downtown Brooklyn on a Friday or Saturday night, the effects of that could be catastrophic.
Like a airplane. Go ahead and cuff him.
Some of those weapons were connected to other crimes. How many guns are in the hands of dangerous criminals? In July, federal prosecutors and ATF agents revealed that a massive undercover operation had recovered 267 guns in just a few months from the most dangerous neighborhoods in the St. Louis area. In all, 159 suspects were charged, and many were already off the streets.
It was an opportunity to try to restore the community, to return some of the freedoms that these fine citizens deserve.
The stunning amount of guns in the hands of criminals willing to use them also poses a constant threat to police. A recent report by the FBI found 72 American law enforcement officers were murdered in 2011. 2 out of 3 were killed with handguns. During the last decade, 10 cops and a deputy U.S. Marshal were gunned down in the St. Louis area. How easy is it to get a semi-automatic gun?
Easy.
Former gang leader Terrell Golson told me what many of today's gangsters think about police. Do you think gang members are scared of police?
No, not these days, it ain't, no.
Was it different 20 years ago?
20 years ago, you'd be running and you trying to hide and all that from the police. Yeah, back then you would.
Not today.
No, today is what it is, you know what I'm saying? You up yours, I'm up mine, we're gonna see who get the first draw, you know?
In some of our most dangerous neighborhoods, police solve less than half the homicides.
3 of my sons have been shot.
Kimberly Schooler's 21-year-old son Jordan was shot and killed in East St. Louis in January. But despite that, she refuses to cooperate with police on any other case. If you knew who shot somebody, you wouldn't tell the police.
No, because they're not gonna do nothing. The way they do it, if they some kin to somebody, they would go and say, well, Craig, well, Kim said that you shot somebody. So then they're gonna come to me. They're not gonna protect me.
The unwritten rules against snitching are the focus of countless rap videos.
Just don't, whatever you do, snitch, 'cause you will get hit. Pray I don't face you, yes.
Those videos may increase cultural pressure to not cooperate with police, but the strong undercurrent of resistance to cops runs much deeper than that. Repeated national studies have shown that blacks are far more likely to get arrested for drugs, even though surveys show whites are more likely to use them. And on average, blacks get much higher prison sentences than whites for the same crimes.
When's the last time you arrested for heroin?
2008. St. Louis County Police say whites from the suburbs are by far the biggest customers of heroin dealers.
Am I being arrested? You're being detained right now, okay?
Why did you and your boyfriend come down there today?
My heroin.
The 33-year-old woman, a self-described addict, agreed to talk with us if we didn't use her name.
Are you afraid that you'll OD someday?
I have.
You have OD'd. How many times?
Twice. Recently, if I wouldn't have had somebody there with me, I would have died.
After several long conversations about the dangers of drug abuse, police finally released her. Investigators say the sale of street narcotics are often the biggest moneymaker for the criminals wreaking havoc in our community. When you combine crime fighting driven by data with a focus on building relationships with the community, then flooding police into hotspots.
What you guys got going on there?
You can have a dramatic impact on crime.
Okay, we're good.
St. Louis County Police say crime is down 40% since they took over policing in Jennings nearly 3 years ago.
Baby's all right? Nobody's in the house?
And in St. Louis City, murders have plunged 31% in the last 6 years. Violent crime overall has also fallen dramatically. One of the keys has been focusing large numbers of police on smaller areas that have much higher rates of murder and gun-related crime. It's called hotspot policing.
No other policing strategy is as effective in reducing crime.
Where's everybody at? You got somebody on containment back there? They're coming around.
Can we afford to do it enough to cut violent crime in half in these hotspots? My sense is yes, we can.
But what happens when the cops are crooks?
Did you commit fraud, Larry?
Negative, sir.
Can I read the warrant to you? Why were you arrested today?
Prosecutors have charged cops throughout the region with a variety of crimes over the years. But nowhere has the impact of police corruption been greater than East St. Louis and the surrounding villages of Washington Park, Allerton,
Chief Baxton,
and Brooklyn. Some of those dirty cops were protected by corrupt police chiefs and mayors who were also convicted and went to prison. It's an enormous challenge, especially in Washington Park, where there are more strip clubs than cops.
Now watch my baby laid out there with his eyes open and look. Please help me and straighten this out, because they know.
Help is slow in coming.
Come on now. I'm broke down about this.
Some memories can haunt you for the rest of your life.
It's just senseless.
Decades of fighting crime in an urban war zone have created memories for Chief Keller, too, including a murder he investigated 20 years ago.
You can still see the lifeless body of that librarian. That's how much of an impact it had on you.
The house, the location of the suspect where he laid.
Now, as he engages in a desperate fight for the safety of Washington Park, the chief of police is sometimes able to offer little more than a prayer for peace.
I'm going to serve this community and do the best that I can do.